Dakota's Delight, Heroes for Hire, Book 9. Written by Dale Meyer. Narrated by Oliver Clarke. Chapter 1. Dakota Langor drove his big SUV through the intersection, his list of things to do today long. He was often the one to go into town, depending on who was available and what else was going on. He did the job cheerfully, knowing it gave him a chance to get out. He loved everybody he worked with, absolutely adored the women there. But for him, it got to be a bit too much at times. He wasn't used to living and working in the middle of a large family, and that was definitely what legendary security had become. He was good with that, but sometimes. Saul was his best friend, and now that he'd found Rebel and she lived in town, the two of them were fast becoming another case of a live-in couple. Dakota knew Saul had discussed with Rebel about moving into one of the apartments on the compound. 8 apartments were being rehabbed for company employees. Dakota doubted that would be enough, considering the speed with which Levi was filling up his company with some of the best damn men Dakota had ever been privileged to work with. Dakota sped down the highway. He might stop for lunch or coffee, but he'd knock the things off his list like a pro, fast and efficient. Most of today was picking up parts and pieces that had been ordered from various warehouses and stores. Food had to be picked up too. That was always fun, as Alfred's list would be huge. The good thing was he had phoned in the order and it was paid for, ready for loading by the time Dakota got there. Considering Levi had so many jobs on the go right now, with men coming and going on a regular basis, Dakota liked this diversion. Saul had just headed out to a job in Alaska and was always happy to go off on missions, but at the same time he would miss his sweetheart. To think how Saul and Rebel had worked out as a couple was amazing. Dakota was happy for his buddy. Saul hadn't been looking for a relationship, but when it came, he'd certainly recognized its value and gone with it. Dakota wasn't sure he'd have the same foresight. He'd never been married, and his years in the Navy had shown just how difficult that life was on his friends' relationships. In Dakota's case, having been a SEAL and going off on dangerous missions had been very hard on his former girlfriends, and he never knew when he would come back, if he would come back. He figured it was easier on everybody if he didn't give his heart away, so there would be less hurt all around. It was not that he wanted to be single all his life, and he certainly had a less dangerous lifestyle now, but it was still the same kind of work, and he was gone on a regular basis. Plus, he'd moved to Texas for this position. He didn't want to do anything to mess it up. He really enjoyed the people he worked with. He'd worried that when he left the Navy, he'd feel this huge apprehension, fear of losing that sense of brotherhood. But as he had hooked up with Levi almost immediately, Dakota had experienced a renewed sense of kinship and a sense of belonging. He loved his new life. The fact that almost everybody here, living on the compound as Levi's people did, was involved in a serious relationship made being single a bit awkward. But Dakota was okay with that because it was comfortable, and maybe because he was even a little envious. He'd watched Saul and Rebel come together, spark back and forth off each other, before settling into something that was almost like a lock and a key. He hadn't really expected that to happen to Saul. They'd been best friends forever. Saul had had several serious relationships during that time. Dakota had thought some of the women were perfect for his buddy, but none had ever worked out. Rebel had been completely different, and yet perfect. Considering how quickly Saul had clicked with Rebel, Dakota had to wonder if he could have that something special too. Not that one could plan for that. Dakota's huge fear was that the perfect woman would walk by and that he wouldn't recognize her. As he came to the outskirts of the city, he checked before changing lanes and then took a right at the next intersection. The best way to get through this long list was to be efficient about which places he went to and in what order. He stopped off at the first warehouse and picked up several parcels that had come in for Levi, loaded them into the back of the SUV, pushing them to the far corner and packing them in tight. By the time he got home today, this vehicle would be stuffed, so he had to pack
Sample complete. Ready to continue?